There is a throne hidden in the scaffolding of Scripture, a throne no angel touched, no prophet dared describe, and no worshipper ever approached. It was not vacant by accident nor by exile. It was empty by design. Before creation, it stood in silence, at the center of all that would be, unclaimed, unshaken, and utterly set apart. Not even Lucifer in his unfallen brilliance reached for it. For this throne was not built for created glory. It waited for something deeper. When the Word stepped into flesh, the throne did not mourn, it paused. When the Lamb was slain, it did not crack, it listened. And when Jesus rose beyond the clouds, the heavens did not simply open, they realigned. What he saw on the other side was not triumph, not homecoming, but a seat that had waited since before time, still untouched, still thundering with promise. And for the first time, the throne was no longer empty. A throne that no angel dared to touch. Before there were stars, there was structure. Before there were angels, there was alignment. And before there was creation, there was a throne. It did not rise from gold, nor was it carved by hand. It was not a seat crafted by glory, but one spoken into being by the authority behind all being. The throne stood beyond dimension, untouched by time, wrapped in the raw will of God, placed not within Eden, nor even within heaven as we know it, but within the very center of divine intent. It existed before names, before law, before light. And it was empty. The hosts of heaven knew of it, though few beheld it. Even the seraphim who cried, "Holy, holy, holy," did not cry before it. They circled the throne of judgment, the throne of mercy, the throne of praise, but this throne stood apart. It had no name because it preceded language. It was not veiled because of its danger, but because of its destiny. It was not the absence of God. It was the presence of something God had not yet revealed. And though countless thrones were seen by prophets in visions, Ezekiel's wheels, Isaiah's temple, Daniel's Ancient of Days, none of them spoke of this one, because this throne was not meant to be seen, not yet. Even Lucifer, in the fullness of his light, the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty, Ezekiel 28:12, did not approach it. Though he walked in the midst of the stones of fire, Ezekiel 28:14, he never touched the steps of this throne, not because he feared it, he did not, but because he was not called to it. For this was not a throne to be taken. It was a throne to be awaited, and only one would be worthy to sit. It is written, "He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe." Ephesians 4:10. But that ascent would not begin until the throne had been emptied by his descent. When the Word became flesh, it was not a departure, it was a divine interruption. The throne remained, suspended in waiting, untouched by every movement of heaven. The angels did not sing before it. They kept silent. Because even praise would not be pure until he returned. There were no guardians around it, only witnesses. Their wings did not shield, and their swords remained sheathed. Their presence was not to protect the throne from intruders, but to mark its purpose in silence. No being was forbidden to sit upon it, because no being would dare. The seat itself seemed alive, yet dormant, holding within it a resonance too deep for time, like a chord waiting to be struck or a breath held since the beginning of beginnings. The longer it remained unoccupied, the more its emptiness defined the cosmos. And heaven did not grieve this vacancy, it aligned itself around it. This was the throne behind the veil, not the mercy seat in the temple, not the vision in Revelation, but the seat for the one who would be both lion and lamb, the one who would descend in humility, die in flesh, rise in glory, and return not to sit among kings, but above them, not beside angels, but over them. A throne that waited not for a conqueror, but for a crucified king. And the question was never who could find it. The question was, would anyone ever be worthy of it? The day the throne fell silent. When the Word descended into flesh, the throne did not shake. It did not wail or split or mourn. It did something far stranger. It went still. Not the stillness of death, nor the stillness of rest, but the stillness of breath held mid-sentence. Heaven, which had never known interruption, found itself caught between movement and memory. The throne remained in place, glowing as always, untouched. But something was missing. Not its power, not its authority. What was absent was its echo. For the throne was not only a seat, it was a voice. It did not speak in language, but in alignment. Its very presence harmonized the layers of reality. Angels who served around it did not hear commands, they felt coherence. Realms rotated around it like stars around gravity, but when the Word became flesh, something shifted. The throne that once hummed with divine intention fell quiet. It was not because it had been abandoned, but because its resonance was now walking among men. It is written, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." John 1:14. The throne did not lose its occupant, it released him. And in doing so, it lost something heaven had never experienced before. Continuity. Not a rupture, but a pause. Not a rebellion, but a sacrifice. The angels watched as the Eternal stepped into time, and none could comprehend what would come next. Because no one had ever left the throne willingly. The silence was not like the absence after war, it was the quiet of decision, the stillness of purpose deeper than proclamation. Around it, the hosts of heaven adjusted their songs. Where once the throne was their north, now it was their memory. The seraphim who once burned in proximity now sang at a distance. The cherubim who once shielded glory now turned their wings downward, not out of shame, but reverence, because this emptiness was not defeat, it was devotion. Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, Isaiah 6:1. Yet even that vision came before the incarnation. What Isaiah witnessed was a shadow of fullness. What heaven now held was the ache of waiting. The throne had not changed, but the one who gave it voice had. His voice now cried as an infant. His steps now stirred dust, and yet even as he walked among fishermen and sinners, the throne remained in heaven, watching. There were no declarations made, no signs hung upon it, only its silence. But the silence was heavy. It pressed upon eternity like a seal waiting to break. Every moment the Messiah bled, preached, wept, and knelt, the throne remained still. It bore witness without words. And as the blood ran down the cross, the silence grew unbearable. The angels who once dared not question now watched in awe as the King of Glory hung between two thieves. They asked no questions, because even they did not understand why the throne remained empty. The throne could have spoken, it could have shattered mountains or summoned fire, but it remained as it was, unmoved, unread, unspoken. Because some victories are not declared from power, but proven through absence. Though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself. Philippians 2:6-7. And in that emptying, the throne bore its greatest burden, not of weight, but of waiting. For the first time since before time, heaven had to believe, not in what it saw, but in what had been promised. The throne had once been the symbol of divine right. Now it became the altar of divine restraint. And every being in heaven knew, when it speaks again, it will not whisper. The cloud was a door, not a disguise. When Jesus ascended, the disciples stood still, gazing upward. Acts records it plainly. He was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. Acts 1:9. For generations, this has been read as metaphor or miracle or mystery. But the cloud was not weather. It was not air. It was not for concealment. It was for passage. Throughout Scripture, clouds were not background. They were boundary. They marked the edge of human access and the beginning of something far older than flesh. In Exodus, God descended in a cloud that covered Mount Sinai, and the glory of the Lord settled on the mountain. Exodus 24:16. When Moses entered it, he entered not just obscurity, but the unknown. The cloud marked the perimeter between the seen and the true, and now, centuries later, the same perimeter appeared, not on a mountain, but in the sky. As Jesus rose, he was not vanishing, he was crossing a veil. The heavens did not open with sound. There was no trumpet, no earthquake, only elevation, yet the shift was seismic. As the cloud enveloped him, dimensions reoriented. Gravity, once binding, surrendered. Light, once revealing, dimmed. What entered the cloud was not just a man, it was the Logos wrapped in blood and glory, the crucified who carried scars into the eternal. This was not like Elijah's chariot of fire. Elijah was taken to heaven. Jesus was returning through it. The cloud did not carry him upward, it received him. It bent space around him, folding the physical into the infinite. The same Jesus who had eaten fish, wept at tombs and touched lepers now passed into a domain where time does not pass and voices do not echo, they shape. He had once torn the veil in the temple. Now he passed through the greater veil, the boundary not between man and God, but between what is created and what always was. He entered the true tabernacle, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. Hebrews 9:11. This was not the return of a king to his court. This was the re-entry of the architect into his inner chamber, bearing the blueprint fulfilled in blood. The cloud concealed him from the eyes of men, but not from the gaze of eternity. As he crossed the veil, he did not do so alone. The silence of the throne awakened. The witnesses, ancient and voiceless, stirred. For the one who had left as word now returned as wound. The doors of the unseen did not swing wide. They bent toward him, recognizing what no creature had ever become, both offering and altar. There was no fanfare, no coronation. The angels did not shout, they watched. Because what approached was not new to them, but more complete than anything they had ever witnessed. He had always been glorious. But now he bore the shape of obedience. He had always been holy. But now he carried the fragrance of Gethsemane, and heaven in all its brilliance held its breath. He who descended is the same one who ascended far above all the heavens, Ephesians 4:10. Yet this was not ascension to distance, it was ascension to nearness. For only in rising could he draw all things unto himself, John 12:32. The cloud was not to hide his glory, it was to transport his wounds. What vanished from sight did not disappear. It crossed into the center of all things, into the heart of the throne that had waited in silence since the foundation of the world. And what the disciples lost from view, the throne now saw for the first time. Not a word without flesh, not a king without kingdom, but a son, marked, risen, and returning. The throne was not abandoned, it was guarded. The throne was never forsaken. Its silence was not emptiness, and its stillness was not neglect. Though unoccupied, it was never unobserved. For as long as it stood, it was watched, not by those who serve, but by those who remember. There were no guards around it, no flaming swords nor thunderous warnings, but there were witnesses, beings older than language, older than song. Their eyes did not blink and their mouths did not speak. They were not placed there to defend. They were there to testify, not to what had happened, but to what was coming. These were not the angels known to man, not the messengers who visited prophets, nor the warriors who fought for Israel. These were the silent ones, keepers of intention. Their assignment was not to act, but to wait, for one moment, one arrival, The moment when the one who left the throne would return, not as breath, but as blood glorified, not as spirit, but as man enthroned. It is written, "You are my son, today I have begotten you. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool." Psalm 110:1. But the seat was prepared long before David wrote the psalm. The throne had always been set apart, not for power but for fulfillment. It bore the pattern of eternity, yet remained incomplete until the incarnate pierced the veil, until scars entered the sanctuary. When Jesus passed into the cloud, heaven did not erupt in sound. It realigned in silence. The throne did not roar, it recognized. What approached was not unfamiliar, yet it bore something new: memory. The Lamb bore the full remembrance of every nail, every mockery, every tear shed on earth. And the throne, once the center of divine symmetry, now bent toward the one who had descended beneath the stars and risen through them. The watchers did not move. They simply bowed, not in suddenness, but in ancient agreement. For this had been awaited since before the ages. This was the one through whom all things were made, John 1:3, yet he now returned bearing what no one else in heaven possessed: obedience perfected through suffering. He had not reclaimed the throne by force, he had fulfilled it by surrender. In heaven nothing is misplaced, every gesture echoes forever. So the vacancy of the throne had not been a lapse in order, but a prophecy in silence. Each day it remained unfilled. It shouted a truth too large for speech, that glory alone could not sit there. Only love crucified could claim it. And now that love returned, not in abstraction, but in flesh and fire. The throne that had never lowered itself now opened to receive what creation once rejected. It did not flare in radiance, it did not sing, it received. Because the purpose of the throne was not majesty, it was union. It had waited not for a ruler, but for a redeemer, not for the creator, but for the crucified. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. Revelation 5:12. The chorus would come, but not yet. For before the celebration there was recognition. Before the crown there was convergence. Heaven itself leaned forward, not because it had forgotten who he was, but because it had never seen him like this. And the throne, which had never known occupation, now felt the gravity of eternity draw near. It had waited through the rise and fall of empires, through angelic silence and human rebellion. It had withstood the weight of expectation and the ache of prophecy. And now it would do the one thing it had never done. It would open the scars that unlocked the seat. He did not approach the throne in triumph. He approached it wounded. The glory that encased him was not detached from pain. It was born from it. The angels who had known him before time now beheld something they had never seen, radiance mingled with memory. The Son of God bore no shield, no weapon, no royal mantle. He bore scars, not hidden, not healed, but glorified. Wounds that did not fade in light but blazed within it. The throne had seen beauty before. It had witnessed the perfection of unfallen spirits, the splendor of burning ones, the music of eternity sung in tongues unknown. But it had never seen this, never seen obedience take the shape of pierced flesh, never seen love engraved in blood. The throne did not recognize him by his face. It recognized him by his marks. It is written, "By his wounds you have been healed," 1 Peter 2:24. But those wounds were not only for man, they were signs in heaven, etched proof that justice had not been delayed but completed. That mercy had not been abstract but incarnated. Each scar was a word in the language of eternity, a sentence carved in flesh that no angel could pronounce and no demon could erase. The Lamb walked into the chamber not as one seeking validation, but as one fulfilling a vow. The throne that had stood silent through centuries now resonated, not with sound, but with response. It had been waiting not for strength, but for surrender, not for power untouched, but for glory tested. And now the one who had been crushed by thorns and pierced by nails stood before it, not diminished, but ascended. He did not rush, he did not reach, he stood. Because there is a moment when fulfillment must be witnessed, not claimed. The watchers bowed again, not in fear, but in reverence. For what stood before them was the proof that God had not only spoken, but suffered, that the architect had entered the ruin and rebuilt it from within. Heaven did not erupt, it inhaled. Creation tilted toward its center. The throne, unmoved for ages, began to respond, not as a relic, but as a living place, awakened by blood. It did not tremble, it did not blaze, it welcomed. Because the scars were not symbols of pain, they were seals of access. Worthy are you, for you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. Revelation 5:9. This was not just enthronement, it was enthronement with evidence. The marks of crucifixion were not erased by Ascension. They were enthroned with it. The throne had not been waiting for the return of the Son. It had been waiting for the return of the Lamb. And the Lamb was not ashamed of his wounds. He wore them as regalia. He carried into the heart of heaven the very tokens of rejection, betrayal, agony, and offered them as proof of worth. Not proof that he deserved the throne, but that he alone had made it ready for others to follow. The seat of power had become a place of invitation. The moment his feet reached the foundation of the throne, heaven knew the waiting was over. Not because authority had returned, but because authority had bled. The throne was not claimed by conquest, it was opened by crucifixion, and now it would no longer be empty. And the heavens shifted. When he sat, the heavens did not rejoice, they adjusted. Not with celebration, but with recalibration. It was not music that filled the skies, it was alignment. Every realm, every rank, every resonance in creation subtly changed its posture. The throne, once a fixed point around which all else revolved, had now become a center of gravity imbued with something heaven had never known. Suffering enthroned. His seating was not symbolic, it was structural. The equilibrium of the cosmos had depended not only on who God is, but on what God had done. Now that act, the cross, the death, the descent, had returned into eternity, not forgotten but glorified. And the throne that had once shaped reality by presence now reshaped it by memory. When he had made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, Hebrews 1:3. But that sitting was more than conclusion, it was consecration. The angels looked not merely upon their king, but upon their mystery. They had known his voice, they had seen his light, but never had they beheld him marked. The glory was not diminished, it was deepened. Majesty, once clothed in radiance, now wore remembrance. Every scar on his glorified body became a new law in heaven, testifying not only to power, but to love that chose to bleed. The thrones of dominions tilted in acknowledgement, the seats of principalities dimmed in contrast. Even the powers of darkness, watching from edges they could no longer cross, recognized the shift. For the one they had seen broken had now become immovable. The Lamb, who was silent before his accusers, now reigned from the place they once coveted. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. Philippians 2:9. But the exaltation was not because he had overcome, it was because he had obeyed. And with that obedience seated, the heavens found rest, not ease, not peace, but order. What had been fractured by rebellion was now reframed by redemption. The throne did not command, it redefined. Every orbit, every hierarchy, every angelic function now took reference not just from sovereignty, but from sacrifice. He did not sit alone. Though no one else would ever occupy that throne, something else sat with him, his body. For in ascending he carried not just victory, but those hidden in him. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms. Ephesians 2:6. The mystery of union became reality. The dust of earth, now made divine, sat beside flame and wind and eternity. Flesh once torn by whips now co-reigned with the one who created light. The shift was not only upward, it was inward. The heavens did not simply adjust around a new position, they adjusted around a new principle. That the center of all things was not glory untouched, but glory tested. That the highest name was given not for might, but for meekness. And that from this point forward, all things in heaven and on earth and under the earth would be measured not just by light, but by love. And the throne, once still, now pulsed with presence. It was no longer waiting, it was no longer silent. The seat that had once resisted occupation now became the seat of mercy, judgment, and final truth. From it, prayers would be heard. From it, decrees would be sealed. And from it one day the king would rise again, not to suffer, but to judge. He had returned, and heaven had changed. What he saw beyond the throne, he did not sit to rest, he sat to rule. And from that throne, his eyes did not drift downward to earth with nostalgia. They pierced forward, through the veil of time, through the haze of future wars, through the whispers of nations yet to rise. For the throne was not the end of his journey, it was the beginning of something else, something sealed, something waiting. Before him lay a scroll, not rolled in parchment or ink, but forged in silence and sealed with meaning. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. Revelation 5:1. No angel moved, no elder reached, because what lay within that scroll was not simply prophecy, it was the architecture of conclusion, the record of reckoning. The Lamb had returned, but he had not returned empty-handed. He bore the authority not only to occupy, but to open. The throne recognized him, the scroll awaited him, for only one who had walked among the broken could now unroll the decree of restoration. Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll? They asked. And there was silence, until the scars spoke. He did not rush to open it. There is power in delay. There is holiness in pause. Heaven had to feel the weight of what was about to be unleashed, because what was sealed was not just information, it was inheritance. Within it lay judgments and awakenings, trumpets and bowls, the rise of beasts and the fall of kings, and at the center of all of it, redemption finished, justice fulfilled, and a bride prepared. The scroll was not unknown to him. It had been spoken in shadows throughout the ages, in Daniel's visions, in Ezekiel's wheels, in Isaiah's fire. But now it was no longer glimpsed, it was granted, and he who had stood in the counsels of God before time now approached it not as word alone, but as word made flesh, pierced, buried, risen. He saw not only the scroll, but everything it contained. He saw the trembling of the nations, the betrayal of the false bride, the dragon waiting in the wings. He saw the Euphrates dry. He saw kings crawl from the abyss wearing crowns not given but stolen. He saw the name of God written on foreheads and the name of blasphemy shouted from the earth. And yet he did not flinch. For what he saw beyond the throne was not chaos, it was culmination. The kingdoms of the world have become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Revelation 11:15. But that reign would be contested, not because its outcome was uncertain, but because the lie must rise before the truth returns. And the one seated knew, the next time he would stand, it would not be to heal, but to divide. He looked into the end, not as a reader, but as its author, every line written in fire, every seal a hinge between mercy and judgment. What he saw beyond the throne was not new. It was remembered. It was what had always been, awaiting the moment when the Lamb would also be lion. And so he waited, not in idleness, but in intercession, not in hesitation, but in preparation, because the seals would not break by impulse. They would break by timing. And when the first was opened, nothing in heaven or earth would ever be the same. The throne is no longer empty. The silence has been broken. The vacancy has been filled. Heaven, for the first time since before time, knows what it means to hold fulfillment within itself. And yet, even in this completion, a tremor remains. Not of uncertainty, but of prophecy. Because the throne that was once unclaimed may one day be unoccupied again, not through loss, but through movement. For the King will not remain seated forever. He is seated now at the right hand of God, interceding for us. Romans 8:34. His presence anchors heaven. His wounds speak better than blood. But Scripture does not end with the throne, it ends with the one who rises from it. Then I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, Revelation 19:11. The same one who once ascended in a cloud will descend again, not hidden, but revealed, not meek, but mighty. The throne has become a place of waiting once more, not because its occupant is unfinished, but because his mission stretches into what remains. His enemies have not yet become his footstool. The nations still rage. The harvest is not yet gathered. And so the throne holds him, not to restrain but to reign, not to delay but to prepare. For when he stands again, it will be the final time. No return after that. No veil left to pierce. Only the word on a war horse with fire in his gaze and justice in his hand. Heaven knows this. The angels have not forgotten. The watchers still watch, not for arrival but for rising. Because when he stood once before to offer mercy, creation saw him bruised. The next time he stands, it will see him crowned. And the earth, which once trembled beneath his crucified feet, will split beneath his triumphant stride. The question is not whether the throne is filled. It is. The question is, do you recognize who fills it now? Not the baby in the manger, not the man on the cross, but the one who walks among golden lampstands, whose voice is like the sound of rushing waters. Revelation 1:15, whose eyes see through nations, motives, and time itself. Because when the throne is empty again, it will not be waiting for another king. It will be waiting for judgment. The Lamb will rise as lion. The intercessor will rise as judge. And those who loved his silence may tremble at his sound. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. Revelation 20:11. There will be no more altars, no more clouds, no more hesitation. So look now, while he still sits, while the throne still holds the shape of mercy, while the scroll remains unopened, though already his. Look now, because the next time you lift your eyes to heaven, the seat may already be empty.